Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me again here as we continue to make our way through the book of Psalms. And we will be picking up today in the 74th Psalm in the 12th verse. Psalm 74, verse 12. And we started in this psalm yesterday, and I looked at the first 11 verses. And again, the psalmist is uh, discussing with God. We'll call it discussing uh, his um, his concerns that he feels abandoned by God. Israel, at some point, most likely the Babylonians have come in and overrun the city, destroyed the city, burned the city, and the people and the psalmist as their spokesman is they're asking God, they're telling God that they want to know why God has abandoned them, why they feel like God has turned his back on the people. The very first verse laid out that description. Oh God, why hast thou cast us off forever? Verse 12, where we're going to pick up today, the psalmist has a dramatic change of attitude. If you depending on your Bible and how the publisher has laid it out, if you can see it, this is a another paragraph that begins here in verse 12. And at this point, the psalmist begins to state his confidence in the Lord. He goes from being afraid, being confused, to being confident and content even. And so just a completely different different attitude. And so what we see as a lesson for us is again in those first 11 verses, there's the psalmist again, he shares his heart with God. He shares his concerns with God. Now, in verse 12, we're going to see that he states his confidence, his faith, to use the church word, his faith in God. He basically is going to say, I don't understand what's happened. We've been overrun and we've been, practically destroyed, but we trust you. And so he's going to declare his confidence in the Lord. So let's pick up in verse 12. He says, For God is my King of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. And so immediately, I think just seeing that verse, you can see that there is a new tone, a new attitude coming from the psalmist. The king, he is my King of old. He's stating that excuse me, that God is still in control, that God is still king, and he has been king. The Babylonians may have, or again, we don't really know for sure, but most likely, I think the Babylonians, the enemy, has come in, and they may have destroyed the tabernacle. They may have burned it, they may have chopped it with axes, but God is still the king. He is the king of old. He has always been the king, and he brings salvation. He works salvation, he says. And so again, the psalmist is stating his confidence that God has always been king, and even though we've experienced a calamity, he is still king, and he is the provider of salvation. Verse 13, thou didst divide the sea by thy strength. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters. Thou breakest the heads of the Leviathan in pieces, and gavest him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. Thou didst cleave the fountain and the flood. Thou driest up mighty rivers. And so at this point, the psalmist reflects back over God's work in Israel, from dividing the sea, a reference back to dividing the Red Sea as the Israelites come out of their Egyptian bondage. Then these other verses, he breaks the head of dragons, the heads of Leviathan, and gavest him to be meat, is referring back to Egypt, that he overcame. He destroyed Egypt, and again, and the reason for those images that it uses there of dragons were because the Canaanites that the Israelites defeated as they marched to the Promised Land believed that their god, Baal, had conquered the sea monsters. And so when they believed Baal ruled over the waters, and so the psalmist here basically says our God beat their God in a simple way of putting it. The dragon, many people believe, is a representative, stands for again Pharaoh, and so again he's just simply saying that God protected and provided, and then you cleave the fountains and the flood. He provided them water from the rock. He later would dry up the Jordan so they could walk across into the Promised Land. And so simply, the psalmist here is just reflecting, right now, we've took a whooping, but we know our God is still on the throne. We know that our God is still King. Look at all the things that He has done, and then He gets very, I guess you'd say, larger in His thinking, because He says, "The day is thine, the night is also thine. Thou hast prepared the light and the sun. Thou hast set all the borders of the earth. Thou hast made summer and winter." And so not only does he say our God is the King because of His deliverance and bringing Israel out of bondage into the Promised Land, but I trust God because He is ultimately not just this little narrow sliver of time and space taking care of Israel coming out of bondage. But He is in control of all things. He has, God created everything. He created light and darkness. He set the borders of the earth. He established the seasons. And so the psalmist is declaring here, God has been, again, let's run a kind of the whole first 17 verses here. We've been beat up. We've been knocked down. Our city, our nation, our temple has taken a beating, but we're going to trust God because He's still on the throne. They may have knocked down the city, but they didn't take God off the throne. And we know He's still on the throne because He is a God who has delivered us through great miracles, great works, brought us out of Egypt into the Promised Land. But even more than that, He has been the creator, sustainer of all things. And so we're going to maintain our confidence in Him. And, I think that's a pretty straightforward message this morning. I don't need to go I don't need to work too hard to get you to see the message, to get you to see the application of this particular psalm and this text thus far. When we feel like the psalmist did in those first 11 verses, when we feel like we have been overrun, we feel like we have been abandoned, we feel like God didn't care, God didn't do anything about it, we need to shift our eyes off of our present situation and put our eyes on a king of old, the King of Kings, who still sits on the throne, who is still has the ability, the strength, the power to deliver us and to protect us, and just look back over what He has done and all the great things that He has accomplished in our life, and all the way back to creation, as the psalmist has said. And so we need to, if we're not careful, sometimes we can get so focused on the temple that has been destroyed that we forget about the King that is still on the throne. Sometimes our cities get, our life gets beat up. Sometimes, like the psalmist here, we take a beating. Things don't go the way we plan, but that doesn't change the reality that God is still on the throne. God is still working. God still cares. God still loves us, and can still do great things in our life. Again, I think the message of these first 17 verses is pretty clear, pretty easy to see, and I just hope you'll hang on to it. Because all of us at times face struggles, and we face problems just like these Israelites were. But just like God was still on the throne for them, He's still on the throne for you and I. All right, have a great day, and we'll see you back here tomorrow morning.